This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Smoke-Free Aotearoa, is it a possibility? Where does vaping fit into the world of smoking and smoke-free, and how to quit, amongst many other questions? Welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute podcast. No mai, haere mai, and welcome to episode 117. Smoke-Free with Professor Janet Hoek. Rhymes with book. I'm Dr Barb, a quantitative ecologist with background in modelling, climate change, biodiversity conservation, prioritisation and SciComm, and a PhD in botany from Ōtākau Whakaihuwaka, the University of Otago. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the OI podcast, the podcast for discerning listeners. Brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. We hope you enjoy our mix of conversations with experts in a wide range of subjects, as wide a range of subjects as we can find from the worlds of arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori. Today's topic is smoke-free, and we are joined in the studio by Professor Janet Hoek, Ōtākau Whakaihuwaka, the Wellington campus of the University of Otago. And welcome, Janet. Thank you for coming on. Regular listeners know that I like to start a conversation by sort of asking a bit about the guest, which in this case is obviously you, Janet. Your qualifications. Now, you started life in humanities with a BA in English. It's fascinating. Followed by honours, 19th century poetry, a master's in very early medieval poetry, and then a PhD from Massey University. I wondered if you wanted to expand on that. 19th century poetry. How did English poetry get you into the Department of Public Health, Wellington?
Well, it's a long and circuitous route, I think. So when I was a student, I couldn't make up my mind whether I wanted to be an arts student or whether I wanted to be a science student. But I had some really amazing lecturers in English literature, and they persuaded me that there was only one possible trajectory for me, and that was to study with them as long as I could. And then, like most students, when I graduated, I needed to find a job, and the job market for medievalists was kind of disappointing. So I took the first job that I was offered, which just happened to be in marketing. And I'm not entirely sure why they wanted a medievalist to fill a marketing position.
I think it's all those soft skills that you learn, because I think you're kind of looking at, an English degree and quite a lot of those humanities degrees. You're reading a lot and you're kind of distilling a lot of information into the critical points, and it's that sort of those what they call soft skills, but they're always the hard ones really, of, critical thinking and reading and distilling information.
Look, I'll take your word for it.
And, being a good communicator, English communication, marketing is all about communication. I can see that.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, I was always really interested in words, even when I was in marketing. So I guess it was a logical segue from that into doing a PhD looking at question wording. And the way in which it moved into public health was I was always much more interested in critiquing marketing than in thinking about why it was going to save the world and be the best thing that.
So not selling Kellogg's. I shouldn't mention proper brands, but not selling cornflakes, but rather understanding why or how they sell, or whether it's a good way that they sell, or whether it's good for us that they do sell, or how that kind of marketing influences our behaviour as a populace.
Yeah, I was interested in the impact of marketing, and obviously you've got the commercial impacts, which is sales and profitability, but you also have societal impacts, and that was really what I was interested in. And when I was a postgraduate student studying marketing at that time, the government was introducing the very first smoke-free legislation.
The 1990s Smoke-Free Environment and
just the Smoke-Free Environments Act, in 1990.
Wow. That's amazing.
And the tobacco industry did a lot of survey research which tried to show that people opposed the introduction of the measure. And
I remember that. I was actually in high school, and I remember, and there's not a lot of folks out there who do remember, when you would walk into any cafe or restaurant or anywhere and it was just full of smoke.
Absolutely.
And everybody smoked in, and it was just, and now it seems absolutely crazy to think that you would walk into a restaurant and everyone would be smoking.
Yeah, isn't it quickly how something that was so normal now becomes outside the sphere
and smoking on planes.
Yeah, and of course
was totally normal. There was a smoking on a plane, right? There was a smoking section and a non-smoking section, and it just seems so crazy now. But yeah, then it was perfectly normal.
It was. So I guess that got me interested in how the tobacco industry operates. And in the early 2000s, there was some litigation taken here in Aotearoa by, it turned out to be by the estate of a woman who died from lung cancer caused by smoking. And her children continued the case. And I got asked if I would be the marketing expert and support the case that the children were.
So you were for the prosecution?
Yes.
Expert witness for the prosecution, as they say in American crime dramas.
And honestly, it was a really transformational experience. I think that's what got me interested in working in smoke-free policy and tobacco control.
That's interesting, And that's so now, of course, you are the co-director of Aspire Aotearoa.
I know.
Wow, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, we do some great work.
Yeah, so it's not just you; it's a massive research centre that is kind of inter-university. There's people. Am I right there?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't describe us as being massive. We'd like to be bigger than we are, but you'll be familiar with the kind of constraints that operate within the tertiary environment at the moment. So, yeah, we've got a cool group of people. We span several different departments, and we've got lots of international connections, which is fantastic because that means that there are great opportunities for us to learn what's going on internationally, but also for us to share what's, the risks, the trials and tribulations of what's occurring in Aotearoa as well.
And obviously you're a research centre there, so you have postgrads and PhDs and postdocs working within your group there in that Department of Public Health, Wellington.
We don't have funding for postdocs, unfortunately, so we have a lot of early and mid-career researchers working. It's
one of the big holes in New Zealand research, isn't it?
Yep.
There's just not that route, and I think for me it's one of the biggest crunch points where people do PhDs and then they're just really coming to grips with research and really hitting the ground, and then basically we go, okay, there's no chance for any postdocs here in New Zealand, go overseas. And it sort of coincides, I think, a lot with that sort of time in your life where you are thinking about family and partners and, starting to have a regular income. And I think that's where New Zealand loses a lot of our amazing young folk who may or may not come back to New Zealand. And I think it's very short-sighted of those in charge of funding. Anyway, I shall get off my little soapbox and just go back to thinking about smoke-free. Who smokes? I mean, it is decreasing, isn't it? The number of people who smoke. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, it has been decreasing, although for the last 3 years it's flatlined. So we haven't seen any change in smoking prevalence from just under 7% for the last 3 years. But prior to that, we were seeing really steady declines.
And it's like in the pre-90s, that 1990, what sort of levels were we looking at then?
At one point we had one of the highest smoking rates in the world. So I haven't got the data for that in front of me, but I think probably around the 50s or 60s, maybe around 2/3 of people smoke.
I mean, that's a huge proportion of the society that's smoking there, and it has come right down. And I guess that speaks to what is driving that downward trend there. It's partly government policy, partly more evidence of the health risks?
I think the evidence of health risks first became documented in the 1950s.
So there was a large delay there in the evidence and the actual stopping people smoking.
And I think there's a very clear explanation for why there was that delay, and that was interference from the tobacco industry. So they ran PR campaigns questioning the science, undermining policy measures, reassuring people who smoke that actually they didn't need to quit. That's when innovations like filters became introduced. So there was really a sustained campaign to try and reassure people, typically using entirely deceptive practices, to ensure that they didn't give up smoking. And I think, perhaps in retrospect, not altogether surprisingly, governments also felt confused by this charade that was being performed.
And I guess also menthol cigarettes and things like flavoured cigarettes, because that kind of makes it not such a
harsh experience.
Yeah.
So it makes smoking much easier to take up in the first place.
Yeah. And I guess the other question is not just how many people smoke, but how that is kind of divided up amongst society. Whether that 7% that's remaining, are they people who've smoked their whole life and just have been unable to quit or give up or unwilling to after a lifetime of smoking, or are they new people taking up smoking, and differences between different kind of socio-economic or ethnic populations?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack in that question. So we have been really successful in reducing smoking prevalence among mid-teens, so 14 to 15-year-olds. There's an annual survey that's conducted, and daily smoking among that population group has been consistently very good. But it doesn't stay that way.
Very good in low.
Very low.
Yeah,
so very good means very low, almost non-existent. But of course it doesn't stay like that. When young people are drinking and they've got some money and it's easier for them to purchase tobacco, we do see that smoking rates increase, but not to the levels that we had previously. And there are lots of explanations for that, the policy measures that you talked about, the fact that we've had a comprehensive government approach, the fact that we've had smoke-free champions, people like Helen Clark, Dame Tariana Turia are two people who come to mind very quickly. So we've done a lot to keep the rates down.
And I guess also the restrictions on advertising, not associating tobacco products with sports and just, not allowing it in restaurants and bars and enclosed spaces. So it's, you have to go outside if you want to smoke, which means that you're outside of the conversation, whatever it's.
So we've made it, rather than an accepted social practice that everybody does, and you're kind of odd if you're not joining in, to a social practice that's increasingly antisocial, where people have to distance themselves, go outside a group, miss out on the conversation, all the things that you were talking about. But when we look at the wider population, there are still key pockets where smoking prevalence is much higher. So if I look at New Zealand Europeans, we've got daily smoking prevalence of 5.4%. It's 15% among Māori. And so we've got sustained inequities. If I look at people who are least deprived, so the most well-off people, smoking prevalence of about 2.5%. The least well-off, much higher than that, over 12%.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? So the richer people in society are much less likely to smoke. And why is that? Because smoking's expensive.
Yeah, I think that there are lots of reasons for that. When you have a look at when smoking first started, it was the richer people who began smoking.
Yeah.
So, and it is interesting that they are the ones who are now less likely to smoke. I think they have greater access to resources that make it easier for them to not smoke. And I think also they're not dealing with the stresses and pressures that people who do smoke have to contend with. So for the most part, they're not dealing with colonisation, they're not juggling multiple jobs, they're not needing to turn to nicotine to manage stress in their lives.
Yeah, and I guess it's an interesting point about stress and how big a influence stress is on if you're trying to quit something, if you're trying to make major behavioural changes in your life, but your life is chaotic and you've got a million things going on that you're juggling, actually I can see how that's actually more difficult than, if you've got, sufficient kind of funding to have a relaxing massage and a game of squash on Saturday and someone else to do the housework and look after the kids or whatever, it does seem like it's easy to kind of concentrate on, your own kind of well-being there.
Yeah,
perhaps.
I think you're absolutely right. And I speak from a real position of privilege, and I think, I don't know what it's like juggling two jobs where the only time that I might get for myself during the day is the time when I can go out from a dreary job that's not particularly rewarding, but I can have 5 or 10 minutes for a cigarette. And so you can see how people come to value that time and the associations that smoking develops.
And it's it sometimes seems a little bit like a meditation type 5 minutes where people are away from, like, you know how people used to, I don't know if it's still a thing in jobs, people have a smoko break. And it used to drive me nuts when I was waitressing as a undergrad. And, we'd be busy all night and the smoking people would be allowed a 5-minute smoke break every hour, but I didn't smoke, so I had to keep working. And I was just so resentful of these people smoking. But I kind of can see how, like, when someone's standing there smoking, you don't interrupt them. Like, it sort of is a little bit like...
Yeah, smoking is an incredibly ritualistic practice.
Yeah, it's like people, when you're having a cup of tea or you're making coffee, like you can just, throw a bag in a cup and have a cup of tea. But you can also go like the whole, teapot, warming the pot, and there's all the paraphernalia that goes with drinking tea or drinking coffee, the kind of the different cups and the warming the pot and the different blends and all the different types. And you can really go to town on that, as you say, ritualistic behaviour. And I think that speaks to it's more than just the smoking.
Oh, absolutely. And especially when you talk with people who roll their own cigarettes. There is a real art form. There's a pride in constructing the object that they go on to consume, and people talk about taking photos of the perfect cigarette and sharing it with their friends. So yeah, it is very ritualistic and it becomes embedded in people's lives. So it's something they do. It punctuates that period after they've had a meal, or it's an accompaniment when they're having some alcohol or a cup of coffee. It really becomes integrated and just generates those connotations of pleasure and enjoyment and relaxation.
Which, of course, is one of the reasons that it is so difficult to quit.
Yes, that's right.
And I guess it's also one of the reasons where we get this, it's a fairly common perception, I think, that if people get ill through smoking or vaping, I guess, it's kind of their own fault, like they're smokers. So, and I think we see that with the way that people treat different types of cancer, when they're sort of more the cancers that are more associated with smoking, or, heart disease or whatever, seems that it's more associated with smoking than cancers that aren't. They're just like spontaneous, stochastic. And I wondered, if you had comment on that as a kind of a general idea.
Yeah, I think the kind of discourse that we're used to hearing these days about people making choices and having to take the consequences that go with those choices, it really embeds the stigma and judgment that you've been talking about. And I guess when we look at it from a public health perspective, that's deeply concerning that people who've smoked and who get lung cancer feel incredibly ashamed of themselves. And that doesn't help anybody, and it's certainly doesn't recognise the other factors that went into people's smoking initiation. And that's an industry that's made a product that is so incredibly addictive that it's very difficult for people to quit. And that's not an accident. We've got millions of pages of tobacco industry documents. We know that they fine-tune cigarettes to be highly addictive. So we can't blame people for not being able to give up a product that was designed to keep them hooked. And yet that's exactly what those people experience. So I guess what we are trying to do is to take a much more compassionate, more empathetic approach. We recognise that around 80% of people people who smoke desperately wish that they didn't want to give up smoking, but can't because they feel so addicted. So what we see
That's quite a huge number, isn't it?
Regret is consistently very high among people who smoke. If they lived their lives again, they wouldn't smoke. I spend hours talking with people who smoke. I've never met anyone who wants their children to smoke.
It's interesting, isn't it? And it is kind of it goes back to those stats that you were talking about on different sectors of society. And of course, they are targeted as well. I mean, advertising isn't blanket. Advertisers don't just go, okay, we're going to just throw everything out there to the world in general. Like, they pick specific groups that they think they can influence more heavily. So I suspect that, and you're the expert on it, so I'm going to throw the question to you. Is that how it works with smoking?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, as you said, we don't have advertising and overt promotion now, but we certainly did in the past, and very specific population groups were targeted. So we've got brands like Virginia Slims that were designed for women. They became a statement of independence, of emancipation, of being able to make it in a man's world. We've got other brands that were targeted at the LGBTQI community. So tobacco companies were very clever.
And the Marlboro Man with his big hat.
The iconic Marlboro Man. And I think tobacco companies just recognised where there were little chinks in people's armour, and they created brands that were friends for people, and it's not surprising that those population groups picked up on them so quickly. Today, of course, we don't have that, so we've seen real declines in smoking prevalence among young people because they don't have those aspirational role models who they want to emulate any longer. But we do have social media. We still have influencers and a lot of branded advertising that goes on social media, and not just for smoked tobacco, but for new nicotine products as well.
I guess that brings us to other types of smoking products and vaping, but also, I mean, people used to have chewing tobacco and all sorts of tobacco type products. Is vaping really better than smoking, or is it just a gateway kind of thing to smoking? Has it got health risks of its own for its own reasons? Where does vaping sit in amongst the smoke-free?
Well, vaping occupies a very ambiguous position, and the answer to that question will depend largely on who you ask. So I just speak for myself here and recognise that there are different views. I mean, I think that there is little doubt now that vaping presents fewer physical risks than smoking. So if people are smoking, haven't been able to quit using approved medications like NRT, nicotine replacement therapy, then vaping would be something that they could move to.
And is the idea that you sort of like move to vaping and then you might eventually use that as a stepping stone?
I think that's how vaping was sold. It's not how it seems to be operating from my point of view at the moment. I don't think that we have very many discussions with people who smoke once they're on vaping about quitting vaping, even though the evidence is that vaping is not a harmless activity and that the best thing that people can do is to switch from smoking to vaping if they haven't been able to quit, and then to quit vaping. So that's thinking just about physical risk. I mean, I guess I spend a lot of time talking with young people who use nicotine products, and vaping is incredibly addictive.
Does vaping still have the nicotine in it?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So you can get 0 milligram nicotine vapes, but the vast majority of vapes that are sold will have nicotine in them.
So it's just substituting the particulate type other chemicals that are associated with smoking that are responsible for some of the cancers, but the actual addictive factor is still there mostly.
Yeah, and I mean, you're very sensible to separate out the fact that vaping doesn't involve combustion, and it's the byproducts of combustion that form the carcinogens that are really harmful to people's health. But vaping is not devoid of chemicals, and people do still face health risks if they vape. But I think vaping it's not a finite behaviour in the way that a cigarette is. You know, like you light it, you smoke it, you finish it.
and the cigarette just is as long as a cigarette is. That's right. Whereas vaping, you could kind of do it all evening if you wanted, and you sort of see people walking down the street doing it.
Yeah, and it's turned from a finite into a continuous behaviour. So when you talk to young people, they're just incredibly addicted, some of them. They wake up in the night, they've got to vape. It's the first thing that they do when they get out of bed in the morning.
Interesting.
They're anxious if they lose sight of their vape and they don't have it with them.
So actually the addiction to nicotine could be much, much higher because they're getting like a much higher dose over a day if you're constantly doing it. Or, you might smoke, 2 or 3 cigarettes, maybe 5 cigarettes a day. I don't know how many cigarettes people tend to smoke.
About 9 on average.
Oh, wow. Is that right? Oh. So what's that once every couple of hours that you're awake?
Mm. But for young people, there's a heavy mental burden that comes with being addicted to nicotine. So when you say, is it better than smoking?
What's a mental burden?
Well, they see themselves as hopeless. They can't escape vaping. They don't know how they can give up. Their self-image deteriorates. It affects their fitness. They feel that others judge them. So it's a very isolating experience. And it's hugely ironic because, they start vaping because they've seen influencers. They think it's cool, it's a way to be connected, and yet actually it ends up by pushing them on the periphery.
Yeah, and being the opposite. That's quite...
So, yeah, as I say, when you think about is vaping better than smoking?
And is vaping sort of more of a young person's thing?
Certainly the dominant population groups there, vaping prevalence is much higher among young people than older people.
And, of course, the regulations around selling vaping and vaping are different from selling tobacco products, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. Although there have been some new regulations, so vaping products are no longer as visible as they used to be. So you may have noticed that vape stores, you used to be able to look in and the whole panoply of brightly coloured packages would be there enticing people as they walk by on the street. Well, that sort of practice is no longer available to retailers. So there have been changes.
Of course, it's a little bit the same as the alcohol industry where you have RTDs with kind of strawberry flavours and raspberry flavours and lots of sugar and stuff to make them more palatable and more attractive to young people who don't really like the taste of whiskey or rum. I don't know. And it sort of seems like that's because vaping itself doesn't have the tobacco taste that smoking does, it's much easier to overlay all those kind of different kind of ice cream flavours over the top of them.
Yeah, I mean, young people often cite the flavours as something that's exciting and appealing about vaping.
You can sort of see how that can be trending as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are some limits now on the flavour descriptors that can be used, but there's still a very wide array of flavours that are available, and they still continue to appeal strongly to young people. Yeah,
and of course we don't know how that affects people in their 60s and 70s that have been vaping for 50 years because we haven't got to that point yet. We're still
Absolutely.
in the very early sections. And I guess that's, for me, why it seems so worrying that it's this very young cohort that's taking it up, because it's another cohort with another thing that has to move all the way. I mean, unless we can, knock it on its head now, it's kind of, that's the most dangerous. Like if 80-year-olds as a group decide to take up some risky sport, it's a limited societal effect, shall we say. Anyway, so moving on, how effective is quitting smoking in terms of reducing your health risks? Because I think a lot of people feel like, I've smoked for 50 years, there's no point in me giving up now.
Yeah, I mean, it is sad to hear people say that. It's completely wrong. I mean, there is always a time to quit and gain benefits from quitting. And people will observe some immediate benefits, so they're going to find that they don't cough quite so much. They will find that they taste their food and enjoy eating more than they did when they were smoking, because their taste buds are not being dulled by the effect of the smoke they're inhaling. And over time, their health risks will also reduce quite dramatically and reasonably quickly. So their risk of some cancers goes down very quickly within 1 to 2 years. Their risks of cardiovascular disease also goes down quite quickly. So there is always benefit in quitting.
It's one of the modifiable risk factors of dementia, I think.
I believe
not smoking, which is, it's kind of a I shouldn't say easy thing, but it is a thing that you can do. It's not an easy thing, but there are solutions out there. What is the most effective way to stop smoking personally or as a society? Or is smoking an individual challenge, or is it actually better taken as a societal national challenge?
Yeah, well, just to look at your first question, I mean, if people want to stop smoking, the best approach that they can take is to get support, because we know that people who have behavioural counselling and support when they're making a quit attempt are much more likely to be able to quit successfully.
How would they do that? Do you go through your GP, or is there a special group? Or
so people can phone the quit line. If they don't want to phone the quit line, they can enrol online. They can send a text through. So the quit line offers subsidised NRT. People can get a quit card that they can redeem at their pharmacy.
So that's that nicotine replacement therapy, and that's the patches that you see, is it?
And gum and lozenges, and I believe that some mouth sprays are also available, although I'm not entirely
So the idea
sure
of that is that you kind of break the habit, the routine factor, without having to break the chemical, and you sort of wean yourself off the chemical addiction of nicotine gradually. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, people are driven to smoke because they're addicted to nicotine, and so what NRT tries to do is to provide that nicotine in a alternative format, basically. It is difficult because, as I was explaining before, smoking is not just about getting a dose of nicotine. It's the whole social practice that goes along with it. But you can see
if you haven't got that physical addiction, that craving, then it's easier to deal with the kind of behavioural, routine, ritual aspects of it. And, if it's easier to kind of do that part of the work if you're kind of separating the two parts of the addiction in a way, and sort of deal with the ritual part and substitute other things like blowing. I've seen people with bubbles. How as a little kid you used to have the bubble blow the bubbles, and chewing pens and pencils and stuff. I'm not advocating people chewing pencils, but I've seen, like, you see people doing that, chewing on toothpicks and stuff, which is just kind of having something in your hand and fiddling, which is kind of just trying to substitute out that behaviour, that ritualistic part. And I guess it's easier to kind of gradually wean yourself off nicotine patches once you've got that kind of habit formed part.
Yeah, I think we have to think about what smoking gives to people is a bundle. As I said, it's not just about them getting nicotine. There are all sorts of other things that it delivers. So when we suggest to people that they quit, I'm a very strong advocate for thinking about the role that smoking plays in their life and going beyond that kind of physiological addiction that they're going to have to manage.
Are there groups like AA, like Alcoholics Anonymous and Gambling Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous? Are there groups like that for smokers?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, certainly with a policy like whānau ora, which focused on whānau well-being, that might have offered smoking cessation support for whānau groups, but I'm not aware of independent groups like AA that
it's funny, mentioned. Isn't it? Because you'd think if it works for alcohol, why wouldn't it work for cigarettes? And it's kind of like alcohol's got that same kind of, it's everywhere. Like it's in, people are always, it's not everywhere, but, it's quite common, and it's a social thing, and it's a convention, which is quite similar to smoking. And if you're, if your social group, if everyone smokes, if everyone kind of decides all at once, hey, this year's the year we're all going to have a go at quitting, then you've kind of got that kind of peer support as well, as opposed to the kind of peer pressure that everybody else is smoking and you're the one who's not. So I guess that's...
I think the quit line would probably offer support to groups of people. Certainly when women or people who were pregnant and smoking wanted to stop smoking, they would offer support both to the individual and to that person's partner.
Right.
So they would try and offer wraparound support like that. But it would be something to check with the quit line. I'm sorry, I don't expect you to know the answer to every single question.
But it just occurred to me that it is kind of a dichotomy, isn't it? And it seems like it's like, that kind of group. And, maybe if we just had more access to mental health therapy as well, like 6 weeks of kind of check-ins with because as you say, it's a whole package of other things that might be there, and I have absolutely no evidence for it, but I imagine that people who are under some sort of mental stress at work or in their life find it more difficult to quit smoking.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And I think having that kind of wraparound support, that really intensive behavioural support is important. But it's got to have funding. And it just seems the ultimate irony that we collect a lot of excise tax from tobacco products and yet it is not ring-fenced and used to support smoking cessation. Which is a tragedy.
It is a tragedy. And of course, it's actually because we have a public health system, which I think is fantastic and we should do everything we can to hold on to it. But because we have a public health system, like the health risks and all the consequences that smoking brings to individuals also come on the society as a whole. And, smoking does have health detrimental things which cost a lot of money. So every person that we can help to quit smoking, not just are they going to have a much healthier life, but it is going to cost a lot less, I imagine.
Absolutely. And it's not simply the direct health costs, it's people's productivity, it's their contribution to society, it's their ability to engage with their whānau. There are multiple layers of benefit that could be achieved.
Yeah, it seems quite short-sighted in a way. Does seem short-sighted.
It seems incredibly short-sighted. What an invitation. I mean, and of course, the focus shouldn't simply be on how do we support people to quit smoking once they've started. Incredibly important though that is, there are much bigger things that we need to be doing at the same time, and that is changing the environment so it is so much easier for people to quit smoking. So tobacco's not available everywhere like it is at the moment. It's not as addictive as it is at the moment. And it just seems absolutely catastrophic in my view that we didn't go ahead with the measures that were in place in the Smoke-Free Environments Regulated Products Act, which was repealed by the current government. And it would have introduced those measures, reducing the addictiveness, reducing the availability, and protecting children who cannot imagine what addiction is like when they first start mucking around with smoking. Yeah. And that's typically when they're teens.
I mean, it's hard to imagine that anyone would vote against protecting children. That's hard to imagine as a slogan, as a party political. We don't want to protect children. We don't want to make it this thing that's causing distress to so many people's lives less addictive. And it does sort of seem like how has that come through? Like that seems like an obvious piece of legislation to come through. It's fairly evidence-based. It's got a mountain of evidence behind it. So how has that happened?
Well, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that question and talking to people about it. I mean, as you say, very strong evidence-based measures, hugely popular with the public, strongly supported by the medical profession and health experts. The only group that didn't support these measures, the tobacco industry.
The people who are directly making money off of other people's misery.
I think we've never had satisfactory explanations about this mystery document that the Associate Minister of Health had, which seems to be summarising a tobacco industry agenda and that looks to have driven policy. I mean, these are real concerns about how policy making is occurring in Aotearoa.
Yeah, no, it does seem quite tragic. I was going to go back to one of the issues that we were talking about before, which was kind of that feeling that people have when, for whatever reason, they've started smoking. They've taken up smoking. So now they're a person who smokes. And as a person who smokes, they're addicted to this substance. And I can see that, as you're saying, 80% of those people who are smokers want to quit or feel regret for it. And that has quite a lot of mental burden on it. So it's all those kind of negative feelings about how you feel about yourself and that kind of negative. And we have quite... And it's funny because the kind of advertising around tobacco products has moved from being, glamorous. All the movie stars were doing it. Everybody was doing it on TV, and it was like this glamorous thing. And then we had this kind of from the 90s onwards where we have on the cigarette packets, we have all the, disease pictures of, this is what lungs look like when you've been smoking, which, I think is really good because it puts out there the realistic part of it. But the flip side of that is that it does make people feel bad about themselves because they can't stop smoking. And I just saw online this thing about hope labels. It's a little animated cartoon, and I'll put the link into it. But I just thought it's actually quite interesting, isn't it? Because it's kind of talking to how people feel about themselves. And if part of the reason that you're smoking is because life isn't going well and you're feeling stressed, making people feel stressed because they're also smoking is not going to make it easier for them to quit. It's actually going to make it harder for them to quit. And if we want them to quit, both for themselves and for society, how does that work? What's the way forward there?
Yeah, it's a conundrum really, isn't it? I think you're absolutely right. The on-pack warnings, which now cover the packages, so they've grown in size since they were first introduced, they're really important. People do have a right to understand the risks that they face, and we know that those labels have played an important role in denormalising smoking and reducing uptake among young people, because who wants to be seen with a pack like that? It's no longer the cool badge that it used to be. But we do need to think about this more compassionate approach that I talked about earlier to people who smoke. And I think we should be adopting measures that have been in place in Canada since 2012 and that have just been introduced in Australia. And that's to have inserts with more hopeful messages and practical tips on quitting.
So just like a little leaflet or a little...
Yep, like a little
post-it note, basically.
That goes inside tobacco packages. And there are two types of inserts. We've done quite a lot of work testing these. We can try and build up people's confidence, like I've got it in me, I've got strategies that I can use when I feel
Duolingo keeps doing that to me. It keeps saying, you can do it. And I just feel like, yes, I can do it. It's funny.
A little bit like that.
It's so blatant. Like I know that it's there to make me keep doing the Duolingo things, but it still works.
Yeah, for sure. And I think people like to feel hopeful. They want something that's going to inspire them. They want something that recognises that they're not just a diseased body organ or a patient in waiting. And
or that they're not just weak and useless, I think. A lot of people kind of have that kind of negative self-talk aspect to it. And that's kind of a really vicious cycle.
Absolutely. And these inserts, while they're never going to be a panacea, but they can help to break that cycle. They can give people positive beliefs about what will happen when they quit, the kind of benefits that they're going to be able to enjoy, and it can give them a kind of aid, a helping hand.
So what do we need to do in order to get these inserts into cigarette packets?
Well, we need a government that's going to regulate to introduce this measure.
Right, because tobacco companies aren't going to want to put them in themselves because it's detrimental to their money funding source because they want to sell more tobacco.
Yeah, it has to be a
so it has to be a regulatory thing.
That's
and I guess that comes down to quite a lot of, like, the big changes that we've seen in changes in people smoking has come down not to personal willpower or personal whatever. it's actually come down to government regulations.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, what government regulation has done is to make smoking too much trouble to be bothered with. And so it's made it a much less attractive, much less affordable. And
it's kind of taken out some of that advantage that the big tobacco industry has.
Yeah, the kind of glamour, the pleasure, the enjoyment, the positive social connotations, they've all systematically been removed. And it's only the addictiveness that continues to drive people to smoke, I think.
Yeah, so if we could actually just say, okay, cut out because, I mean, you could do that, couldn't you? You could say, okay, this year, this is what the nicotine is in all the tobacco products. Next year, it has to be across the board 10% less. People would probably not notice it when they were smoking.
Yeah, and if we were, I mean, there has been research that's looked at that question. So you could have a gradual reduction in the nicotine content, but the problem with that is that people would probably just habituate. So they get used to it and they may smoke more intensively. And we definitely wouldn't want them to do that.
Okay.
So the most effective way to do it is to have a dramatic reduction in the nicotine content. And the legislation that Dr Aisha Verrill introduced did exactly that. And all the modelling, all the evidence that we have from trials overseas is that would have seen smoking prevalence decline very rapidly and very equitably.
That's interesting, eh? And it's interesting that it has both those aspects, that equitable. So that means, like, across all of those socioeconomic, racial boundaries and groups, it would come down.
Yeah. I mean, I've got colleagues who ran the modelling. I've seen graphs from it. We just see this massive predicted reduction, and we see the gap that's always existed between Māori and non-Māori just get eliminated within a matter of years.
That's interesting, isn't it? So it's really a question of equitability as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think we have to remember that Māori were a tūpeka kore, a tobacco-free society. And it's a terrible indictment, I think, that they now bear the heaviest burden of harm from a product that was never part of their culture.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that's absolutely true. Has somewhere else tried this? Has it been done somewhere else?
So denicotinisation hasn't been formally adopted in any country, although we know that it is on the Food and Drug Administration's policy agenda, so it's something that they are looking at. But many of the other measures that were proposed in the legislation that got repealed have been introduced.
So what other measures were there?
Well, greatly reducing tobacco availability is important because we know when people get stressed, if the dairy is just down the road, it's got cigarettes.
I think that's like with everything. That's like with chocolate and potato chips. If there's potato chips in the house, and I will eat them at some point because they're there, and I'll go, oh, I'm stressed, I'm hungry, whatever. If they're not there, I don't eat them.
Absolutely. So getting rid of the vast number of retail outlets has been done in towns in the United States, and I've just seen some evaluations of those, and they seem to be very successful. And the other measure, a longer-term measure, but the one that really focused on protecting children, which was the Smoke-Free generation, that's been adopted by the Maldives, so countrywide.
The Maldives, that's interesting. And so how would that work, that one?
You just set a birth year. So here in Aotearoa, it was the 1st of January 2009. Anyone born on or after that date would no longer be able to be sold tobacco products. And
so as they grow older, they don't age into the population that can smoke. They just stay a smoke-free generation.
Exactly.
And it's like grandfathering cats on the peninsula for a totally different thing. Like, if you have a cat, we're not saying you have to kill your cat, but once that cat reaches the end of its life, don't get a new cat. And it's kind of that same effect, isn't it? It just means that there's a line there. And then, so that 2009, when would we be smoke-free from that? When would that happen?
As an individual policy, as I said, it would have a long-term effect. And I think that's why the package that Aisha put together was so powerful, because it had the quick-acting denicotinisation, supporting people by making tobacco less available, and then focusing on locking in those longer-term benefits through the smoke-free generation.
Yeah, and then, of course, if you add into that those other proven ways of kind of making people feel better about quitting smoking, the little inserts of kind of positivity in the smoking units. smoke packets, and I guess making it easier for people to access those behavioural helps and those group kind of counselling sessions, all of that sort of stuff, and that wrap around kind of all of society, then it moves towards that, doesn't it?
It does. And I mean, they were all part of the Smoke-Free Action Plan that was put together. So there were legislative measures, but there were also community measures. So ensuring that that support, extended availability of cessation services, that was all part of the package.
I would love to know how much, and I don't know if you have these numbers straight in your head, I don't expect you to, but I would love to know how much as a country smoking costs New Zealand and how that balances against the amount of tax that we get from tobacco products. Just to see the numbers as well, because I just can't. I mean, not that I think that numbers are everything, because I actually think that we put, as a society, we sometimes put too much emphasis on the money side of things. But I think in this case, because all of those health risks are so expensive, I think that it can't help but balance out.
It's a long time since we did that kind of analysis here in Aotearoa, so I don't have up-to-date data that I can share with you, but I think when you have independent researchers, and by that I mean people who don't have links to the tobacco industry or receive funding from the industry, what you typically find is that the costs of dealing with the consequences of tobacco outweigh the revenue that's generated through excise tax or GST or other sales taxes. And I think you also need to think about, not just the direct health costs, you need to think about, people's productivity, they have fewer sick days, they're more capable.
And their quality of life as well, their quality of life. And,
which is really important.
And quantity of life as well.
Yeah.
To be fair. But, it's crazy, isn't it? I can't see why we don't have those numbers. That should be something that should be funded by government research.
It would be. There are a lot of things where I think we could make enormous progress if we had better funding.
So I guess the final question is Smoke-Free Aotearoa a realistic goal? Is it something that we could do if we put our minds and our money and our government legislation to it? I mean, this seems quite simple in that the legislation is already there, it's already written up, it's been repealed, but you could presumably just unrepeal it if the government changes in November. That would be a thing.
I mean, we would really hope that it would be a high priority on the government's agenda. I think that the situation now is more complex than it was when the original super legislation was introduced. We've got the rise of vaping. We've got new nicotine products that the current government is looking to introduce, and that we know from work that we've done, young people are already accessing internationally. And
so new products aside from vaping.
Yeah, so oral nicotine pouches and products like that.
Oral nicotine pouch?
So little sacks, it's called parking them on
like chewing tobacco, but in a little bag?
Most of the ones that young people are using don't contain tobacco, so they're not like snus, which is widely used in Scandinavian countries or especially Sweden. It's synthetic nicotine, and it's just a white powder that's within these little pouches, and people pop them on their upper gum and they absorb nicotine through their oral mucosa.
It sounds disgusting. It sounds really like it's no longer got any ritual about it. It's just snorting drugs.
Young people go onto TikTok. You will see all sorts of rituals that have been promoted and evolved around that. But I guess your question is, can we achieve, I would say, not just a smoke-free society, but a nicotine-free society? Because I think that's the goal that we have to be working towards. I think we have to recognise, and we haven't talked about this much, but Māori aspirations, and remember that we were a tūpeka kore society. Tobacco and nicotine weren't part of traditional practices. I think it's eminently achievable. The only thing that we need is a politician who's prepared to champion it.
Yeah, and it's right at that government level. Hey, thank you very much for joining us here today, Professor Janet Hoek, rhymes with book. It's been great to talk to you. Lots of interesting things there. For those out there who are in Dunedin, long-term listeners, remember the by-election is the 12th of May. Register to vote, www.vote.nz. Nominations close on the 2nd of March. As we go to air, there are 7 candidates out there, which I personally think is all that we need. You've been listening to the OI podcast with Dr Barb in conversation with Professor Janet Hoek from Aspire Aotearoa. Thank you for tuning into the OI podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, check out past conversations on the blood-brain barrier, dementia and anaesthetics, amongst others. Tell someone how much you enjoyed the show and do all the things, the like, the subscribe, follow, review. You can help the OI podcast bring expert opinion, facts and research to life through conversation with experts in the fields of art, sciences and Mātauranga Māori by donating to the OI on our website, www.otago-institute.org. You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout out for the arts, sciences and Mātauranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.